Dr. Akiva Gamliel, Belk, Dean of Jewish Studies at Noach Torah Institute, LLC. Welcome to Bereisheit, Limood, Kuf, Bet. That's Genesis chapter 22. Now, Genesis chapter 22 has 34 sachim, 34 verses. And our discussion is entitled The 10th Trial of Abraham. This is our textbook. It's entitled Gematria and Mysticism in Genesis. And this word here is ot, and that means sign. Okay? So, dear ones, as we begin our discussion, I would like to point out that the number 10 is represented by the letter Yud. The letter Yud is a tiny letter in the Hebrew alphabet. It's the tiniest of all the 22 letters, or the other final letters. Yet, the letter Yud is a powerful letter. It's used to, when it's added to a word, it's used to express strength and power. And so, even though it's little, it has a lot of influence, we'll say it like that. Now, when we began our discussion in Genesis chapter 22, verse 1, we read that the Lord, Nisa, tested Abraham. Now, Nisa means to try, to prove, and it is the gematria of 115. Hazak. It's interesting because when we complete, like the Sefer Bereisheit, at the end of Sefer Bereisheit, we say Hazak, Hazak. It means strength, great strength. That's also the gematria of 115. So mystically, as we begin our discussion, we want to keep these two gematrias in our mind. Now, dear ones, we all face struggles in life and issues. I had a friend, a dear friend, that said, Akiva, he'd take me by the lapel, Akiva, everyone has a pack. And he was really telling the truth. We all have issues that we have to face. Our issues are not going to be on the level of Abraham, our father. But they're very big to us. They're very challenging to us. And so everyone, the wise, the poor, the rich, the famous, we all have issues. And the issue is to our level. So if a person's greater, the issue will be greater. It will be to that individual's level. So Abraham was very great, and the issue was to his level. Now the Lord said to Abraham, Abraham, and Abraham said, here am I. And the Lord said, take your son. And Abraham said, I have two sons. And the Lord said, your only son. And Abraham said, Ishmael was the only son of Hagar, and Yitzhak is the only son of Sarah. And so then the Lord said, take the son that you love. And Abraham said, I love Ishmael. I love Yitzhak. Then the Lord really pinned it down. Take Yitzhak. Now Yitzhak was the son of promise. Ishmael would be a great man. He would have a number of princes in his descendancy, a lot of rulers and leaders. But Yitzhak was the son of promise. God gave the promise to Abraham that Yitzhak would receive the covenant that he gave to Abraham. And so the covenant of receiving Eretz Israel. And the other promises that the Lord gave along with that. So he said to Abraham, take Yitzhak and take him to this place that I'll show you. and offer him as a sacrifice there. Now, can you imagine? Abraham is 137 years old. He's a senior. He's a senior citizen. And he's like, this is devastating. I mean, seniors get bad news and they can easily fall apart. But Abraham was strong. He was courageous and he was obedient. And so he arose early in the morning and he prepared and he got his young men and they headed off with Isaac. And they traveled for 3 days and they came to the place of Mount Moriah where the Lord had Abraham build an altar and place Isaac on this altar. And then he took his girdle off. You know, in those days, men wore long garments. They'd have shirts and jackets so much and slacks. They just wore one garment and was tied around the waist to separate the lower part of the body from the upper part of the body. And so that way you could say a bracha. And so he took his girdle off, and he secured Isaac on the Mizbeach, on the altar, and he was preparing to take his life when an angel that the Lord had given a message to spoke to him and said, Abraham, I now see that you love me with all your heart, and I can see that you're really dedicated to me because you're not withheld your only son, the son that you love, Isaac, the son of Sarah, the son of the promise. And so there's a ram, and over there you can go get that ram and sacrifice that ram instead of your son. And so they did that. The whole point is, though, is that he went through the whole process right to the very end where he was preparing to offer his son. And so we know that he was a man of faith. He was a man of courage. And we recognize that. Now, dear ones, we're going to just do a little twist here, a little spin, okay? When we get on a jet plane, or we get on a ship, or a train, or an automobile, we use that piece of transportation with the knowledge that the engineers that helped design it and construct it have tested it to make sure it works properly, tested it to make sure it's safe. And so we have this knowledge that in using it, we should be all right, God willing. And so the whole point of Avram being Nisa, to be tested, to be tried, is to show us an example of a man who God really tried and who really stood the challenge of the trial and the test. So that when we're tried, so that when we have issues, even though they're not nearly as great, but they feel as great, okay, to us, that we have an example. And Abraham was a great example of faithfulness to God, of having faith in God and not being disrupted. And so that gives us chazak, that gives us strength, that gives us courage to be able to face those challenges that we have. Now, dear ones, this past year I write about it in the book, and there's many items in the book that we cannot talk about on the discussion here. But I write about it in the book. The Rebbetzin and I, we have had a real challenging 18 months. In the book I said that the Rebbetzin has been to over 100 medical, doctor, hospital appointments and several surgeries. Well, it's a lot more than that now since I began writing the book. But yet, the courage of the Rebbetzin, yet the determination of the Rebbetzin. Oh, my heart has been so touched to see what she went through in fighting this horrible disease, and to see how courageous she has been. It's not easy. And so, dear ones, when we face these challenges and we face these trials, we know that God is with us and that God is going to only allow us to be challenged to a particular limit and not to be worried about that. So, dear ones, as we look into Genesis chapter 22, at the very end of chapter 22, we see the promise of Rivka, the wife for Yitzhak. And so it begins with this tremendous challenge. It begins with all the stress And perhaps Abraham didn't feel the stress like we would feel the stress. I can't say, I wasn't there, I don't know. But he was a man that was human like us, and there's no reason to think he wouldn't feel stress. Yet on the other hand, his great belief in God, his great faith in God, his emunah, faith, was so great that we just don't know. It's amazing. Abraham is such an individual of great stamina in the word emunah, in faith. And so each of us, we can look to Abraham, we can look to HaTorah, we can look, whether we're B'nai Noach, B'nai Yisrael, we can look there and we can receive courage and we can receive guidance in how to approach our issues. Thank you for joining with me.